What can you learn from an INFJ who's in love? Stick around for today's show to learn 6 things. For starters, if you're an INFJ who's in a relationship, you realize how amazing that really is because it doesn't happen that often, at least not for a lot of INFJs, because we tend to be very sensitive to what other people say about us. That's because the first two cognitive functions that make up our personality type, introverted intuition, extroverted feeling, make us especially tuned into what other people are saying and thinking, even if they don't come out and tell us point blank. We tend to read in to their tone of voice, their mannerisms, and other social cues. And we're just very sensitive to anything they say. So we don't want to invite a bull in the china shop, so to speak, inside our personal lives, telling them about the most precious things that we hold close because we don't want to get trashed. We are super aware of what others are saying. And so we want to make sure the person who comes in is trustworthy. All that to say, that's going to limit how many people we tend to get to know. And we take our time opening up and letting people in. But if we feel like the relationship's okay, we've done our investigative work and it's come to pass that we're actually in that relationship, it's a very exciting thing. But because we're so sensitive, it may take a while to even get started. And as we're getting to know somebody, we may be really slow to open up until we get to the point where they've earned our trust or we feel like we can put our trust in them. The second thing you can expect from an INFJ in a relationship is somewhat of a contradiction in terms. That phrase represents our personality on a lot of levels, but the one I'm talking about is where we really enjoy being with people on one level, but we also still need a lot of time to ourselves. So it can be confusing to others who, at one minute, have a great day hanging out, but then the next minute, we are unavailable. And this is especially the case when an INFJ is dating an extrovert or in a relationship with an extrovert, because that extrovert is going to need and desire more time and attention from the INFJ, but the INFJ is going to need more time alone. And then you have the challenge of figuring out where to draw the line, because if the INFJ gives more of himself or herself than he or she really wants to, then in the end, he or she is going to feel frustrated and is not going to be happy, because giving really what you want to give, that's what leads to a positive relationship, even if you're giving sacrificially. And there needs to be a balance here. But on the other end of things, if the extrovert is conceding too much quiet time to the INFJ, then that person's probably not going to be happy either. So finding a balance here is helpful. And it may be helpful too to communicate up front, hey, I love being with you, but I also need some time to myself. How can we make this work so that you get your needs met and I'm getting my needs met as well? Even if you're with another introvert, just talking about the fact that you're not as steady and your life in some ways is a little different at times. You're not going to be on one level the same person every day, although you will be. It just looks a little bit different than other personality types. So having that conversation up front can be very helpful. 3, you're going to find someone who tends to analyze and perhaps overanalyze. So as I mentioned in the first point, we're very sensitive to social cues and what other people are thinking and saying. In fact, most INFJs love to find out what really makes a person tick and what's going on in his or her mind. That's a positive, but it can become a negative when we're hyper attuned to what other people think. And when we're in a relationship with a significant other, then we're especially concerned with what that other person thinks and what that person thinks about us. It varies depending on the maturity of the INFJ and the age and the life experience and what he or she has gone through, but that tends to be the case. So when that significant other says something that maybe he or she doesn't think through, or that the INFJ interprets in a wrong way, then the INFJ may go a whole day just thinking about what that person said and analyzing it from a number of different perspectives, maybe talking to some trusted friends or just turning it over and over and looking at it from different angles in his or her mind, so much so that it becomes a problem when maybe it was just a simple phrase that didn't have that much meaning. So that can be a challenge for INFJs. And then vice versa, the INFJ may be overly critical of what he or she says. Now, it's good on one level to think about what a loved one says and what you say and to analyze it, but to do this on ad infinitum is not healthy, but it's just a challenge and a tendency that we need to overcome. So we can be super critical of our words and worry how others receive what we said, when most of the time what we say just is already in the past and the person didn't give it a second thought. And this is to some extent the spotlight effect, where we as people tend to think that everyone is hyper analyzing everything we say like we tend to do. But in reality, most people are thinking more about what they say and what others think about them than the other way around. So just be aware that you'll have a tendency to overanalyze, and sometimes you just need to let it go and move on. Another telltale sign of an INFJ in love is also a product of the same function that causes us to overanalyze. Our introverted intuition makes us want to futurize and think about the relationship and how it's going to play out in the future. So when you have free time and you're not overanalyzing, you're probably thinking about the person at least some of the time and planning out how the two of you are going to work together into the future. If you're thinking about marriage, you'll think about how that relationship will work out, and you'll think about your mutual goals and how you can support each other. And you may plan the next 10, 15, 20, 30 years, maybe the rest of your life. I know that I was guilty of just thinking about how the rest of our lives would play out and working it out in great detail in my mind when I had free time. Now, this is a good thing because we want to think about the potential of the relationship long term and how it'll play out before we commit to something very big and life altering. But on the other hand, it can be a negative thing in that we may be overly critical of the other person or overly idealistic and not give the other person enough time and space to unfold and really be themselves. Because while we can have a great prediction of how things are probably going to go, we don't know everything, and there are a lot of factors that play out too. So we need to be careful of requiring too much of other people and not giving them enough time to unfold and to learn more about them, because the more information we have, the better we can predict. But again, we can't predict everything about the future. But you can know of an INFJ in love that to some extent he or she is going to be thinking about how things are going to play out in the future. A fifth point that you can expect from an INFJ in love is someone who's going to want to better understand his or her significant other. INFJs love to find out, as I mentioned before, what makes people tick. So we want to know our significant other's life history, their struggles, their triumphs. We want to know their passions, their purpose, what their plans are for the future, what their hopes and dreams are, and even what their sense of humor is, so that we can learn it and relate to them on a deeper level. We'll engage in some of the more shallow relationship development sort of conversation that's required at the beginning, but what we really long for is to understand the other person, and vice versa, to be understood on a similar level. We want someone we can trust, who will accept us for who we are, and who is going to take the time to find out who we really are and what makes us tick. Now, we need to be careful here because we are wired to do this and we desire to do it, but other personality types don't necessarily want to do that on the same level, or don't tend to pursue the same kind of information. So we need to be careful of expecting too much from other people who have different gifts. But to some extent, that's what we require of others or desire from others. And we should, in holding others to that standard or asking that from others, also expect of ourselves that we learn the other person's desires and needs and the ways they like to be served. So on a really practical level, while I desire these things from my wife and deep talks about passion and purpose in the future, what she wants a lot of the time is practical acts of service. I'm talking about getting the chores done, taking care of the dishes. Those sort of things make her feel loved. So if I'm expecting something from her, I need to give the opposite. And that's a good thing to keep in mind as an INFJ. We need to remember what makes a relationship great a lot of times is that other person isn't an INFJ, unless you're in an INFJ relationship. So figuring out what makes that person happy and doing that is going to encourage, hopefully, him or her to find out what we want them to invest in the relationship and to do that. Last but not least, it's important to remember that INFJs are dominant intuitives. We trust our intuition first and foremost, at least if we're healthy INFJs. So as we are getting to know another person, getting to know that significant other, we're constantly going to be putting the pieces together and looking for the pattern and trying to determine, is this relationship a good one? Is it going to play out well in the future? Is it healthy? And we will trust that intuition in the end, even though it may be hard to explain why the relationship works or doesn't work, at least initially, until we give it some thought and have an opportunity to talk to others and work out what we're really thinking and feeling. But we have to, on a certain level, trust that intuition personally before we're going to go and run with the relationship. And that was an interesting revelation for me, because I know that I dated a couple people, not a ton, but a couple people before I married my wife. And I just knew on one level that they probably weren't going to work out, and ended up cutting them off. And I don't know that I could explain it right at that moment why that was the case. There were a few factors that kind of jumped out to me, but underlying them was this deep sense that this probably isn't going to play out well in the future. And that intuitive understanding can be helpful in making the final call. And it's not necessarily wrong or right. It's just how we're wired, and other types are going to depend more on other factors when they make a final judgment too. Now, with this in mind, it's good to also consider other types of information before you make a final call. I mean, you want to lean into how you're wired, but it's helpful to talk to some other people whom you trust, who have observed the other person, observed you together, and get that other information. Or if you are a person of faith, you'll probably want to pray about the decision and think about whether or not the relationship is going to honor your core beliefs or not. And there are other factors as well. The key is just not to rush to a decision. You want to trust your intuition, but you also want to consider other bits and pieces of information as well, because it's possible that you might move a little too quickly or miss out on an important bit of data or information that you wish you would have had before making the final call. If you found this video helpful and you'd like to learn more about your INFJ personality, then I'd love to give you a free copy of my book, The INFJ Personality Guide. In the book, you'll find out about the mindsets or cognitive functions that cause you to do what you do, that motivate you, and that make you a unique person. You'll also find out about some common INFJ challenges, as well as some solutions to those challenges. And ultimately, I wrote this book to help you understand that you're not messed up or broken, but that you're just different, and that the world needs your gifts. You can grab a copy one or two ways. And again, it's absolutely free, no strings attached. And the first way is by texting the letters INFJ to the number 444999. Or alternatively, you can visit ispeakpeople.com/INFJ-personality-guide. And you can find that link in the description below this video. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you found it helpful. If you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, I encourage you to do that. I'm creating new videos each and every week for INFJs just like you that help you better understand why you do what you do and what makes you tick. I look forward to seeing you on the next show.